Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are finally going to be testing out the new Hourglass Curator eyeshadow palettes. Now I did purchase two of these. These were originally launched on Bloomingdale's first, and when Bloomingdale's launched them, they actually had a buy one get one half off sort of deal going on. So that is why I purchased two, because these are very expensive. These retail for $68 US or 92 Canadian. So very, very pricey. I got Futurist and Modernist. Now these are both made in France. They have a 12-month shelf life, and each palette comes with 4 grams of product. Now these palettes come in 6 different color variations, and these are described as an artfully curated collection of eyeshadow palettes featuring velvety formulas in 4 different finishes that offer buildable, easy-to-layer shades to create effortless multi-dimensional looks. Now, the different color stories are the Minimalist, which is a universal matte palette. We have Realist, which has true dimension, polished neutrals, and mixed finishes. This one actually looks really, really pretty, and I really did consider getting this one. Then there is Idealist, which has an ethereal glow, dreamy shades of rose and pearlescent pink. I also debated on this one. Expressionist is all for metallics, so they do have an all matte palette and an all metallic palette. Then we get into the color stories that I purchased. We have Modernist, which is a cool toned palette, and Futurist, which is the warmer tone bronze and copper color stories. So this is what the inner packaging of the palettes look like. These are very small. For reference, they are about the size of the palm of my hand. They are very, very lightweight. This does seem to just be a very light tin sort of packaging. You do get a mirror here, and then you do get the 4 shades. These do each have 4 grams of product, so it's not too bad. The detailing is quite pretty. It is raised here, and then it sort of evens out here at the bottom. And then on the back, you get the legend of the shades. Now, the first color story I picked up is Futurist, and this is our basic blend of warmer leaning browns. Definitely appropriate for every single day. And that's one thing I noticed. Aside from the all metallic palette, I noticed that the color stories of these quads seems to all be very neutral, wearable, everyday color stories. Nothing is too intense, nothing's too out there. It's just very basic shades. So I don't think any of the color stories are going to be vastly unique. I will create a look with each of these palettes, and then I will show you some comparisons to other palettes that I have in my collection, but I just wanted to mention that these are all going to be very basic brown tone palettes. I do think this palette is very, very pretty. I will pop up the swatches. So this palette contains a shimmer, 2 mattes, and a metallic. I do think the color story is beautiful. I think all of these shades work very well together, and this is definitely a color story that I can see myself reaching for quite a bit. Quickly popping over to Modernist, because this is our sort of cool toned palette, and this is beautiful. This one has 3 mattes and a metallic. The metallic in here is this really beautiful cool toned taupe that I do think is really, really gorgeous as well. So popping up those swatches, once again, a very everyday, very wearable, effortless looking type of color story. So let me zoom you in. We will create a look with each of these palettes, and then I will get into some comparisons. So first, let's start with the Modernist palette. So again, just a very basic cool toned color story. I like that we get this basic cream shade here. This shade will be beautiful for setting down the eye primer. It will be perfect for blending those edges. That is what I always love a good shade like this for, and I think I will use this one to go all over the lid just to set down a nice base. I have already done all of my swatches and swatch comparisons with this palette, and I do have some preliminary thoughts, but I do want to see how they perform on the eyes. I did already prime my eyes with my Sigma primer base in Persuade. Now I'm going to go into this lighter taupe shade right here. I do think this will be my perfect crease shade as well. Swatching these shades out, they did feel very, very smooth. They're very creamy. They did swatch well. They picked up well. They seemed pigmented enough. And just sort of reinforcing that outer corner a little bit. Seeing if I can kind of build these shadows so it looks a little bit more dimensional. I like that you do get a little mirror in here as well. I do think the size of these palettes will make them really, really nice for travel. And this is letting me build it a little bit, but not much. Okay, with a smaller brush, I think I want to go into that deepest shade in the quad and just adding this to that outer corner. Just giving us a little bit of dimension. I don't want to blend it too high. I just want to add dimension. And I do want that lighter taupe to stand on its own in the crease. These are blending very, very well together though. Okay, now I want to go into this sort of taupe metallic over here, and that picked up with the brush pretty nicely. This is the Refer 28. That's actually applying really, really well with the brush. This metallic is very, very smooth. I didn't get any fallout either. I do think it's a very, very smooth shade, and it does look nice. It's really not giving us much shimmer, much shine at all, but I think it's kind of designed that way to be that more refined type of shade. I'm just going back into this lightest shade here, and I'm just picking that up on a small brush, and I want to use this for my inner corner. It might not do much, but I do think it'll clean up the area a little bit. Okay, I don't want to do a wing or anything, but I do want to grab a liner brush, and I just want to grab this deepest shade. These powders are giving me a little bit of kick up in the pan, so they are a little bit softer. I don't think they're as soft as those ABH shadows that will break if you look at them incorrectly, but they are a little bit softer pressed. I'm just adding a little bit of definition to that lash line. Okay, I just popped on some mascara, and here is the finished look with the Modernist palette. I do think this is so pretty. I love the way the shades work together. The mattes really did blend so effortlessly. This metallic taupe here is very light on the metallic, if you will. It's really more of a satin to me. I feel like you really don't get much shine from it at all. So this metallic really is more of a satin, but I still think it looks really pretty. This look kind of reminds me very much of the 90s a little bit, but I kind of love it. So I'm really liking this look, and I do think I like this palette quite a bit. But let's get into the other palette, then we can get into some comparisons. All right, moving into the other side, I think we're gonna start with this shade right here. Same thing, I have primed my lids with my Sigma primer base and just set it down with a little bit of powder. So I'm gonna start by putting this shade in the crease. This is a really, really nice crease shade. Like I was saying earlier, I don't think these color stories are unique at all. But I don't think they were meant to be. I think they were curated to be very neutral, very everyday palettes. And I can kind of understand that, especially if you're spending this kind of price point. You want something you're going to want to wear every day. And I don't want to say most of us, but I know a large portion of us are probably leaning into neutrals day to day. This shade is blending really beautifully. I am sort of building it up in the outer corner as well, and it is doing a really, really nice job with that. Then I think I want to go into this bottom shade. I'm going to do a very similar thing that I did to the other side, but just starting to add this one to the outer corner. This shade is really pretty as well. It's not quite as warm as the first one, but it is just giving a nice amount of definition. Again, just focusing this one really on that outer corner, just kind of making sure to reinforce that V a little bit. Then I want to grab that same flat brush I used for the shimmer in the other palette, and I want to go into this one right here and add this one all over the lid. This metallic does seem to have a little bit more shine to it than the taupe metallic on the other side. I would say this one is more of a metallic. I wouldn't describe this one necessarily as a satin like I did the other one. However, I'm not getting any fallout with this one either. Okay, I'm just going to clean off that brush because I want to use it again to go into that shimmer shade. This one is described as a shimmer, so I'm going to put this one, oh, that's really pretty, on the inner corner. And I do kind of want to bring it up a little bit as well. See if I can add a little bit of shimmer to that inner portion. That's quite pretty. I do feel like I need to blend a little bit better though. Okay, I want to see if I pick this one up with a finger and just sort of place it on that inner portion. Okay, that's pretty. And that shimmer really does feel very, very smooth and buttery. All right, so that's quite pretty as well. Let me quickly pop on some mascara and then I'll come back to show you the finished final look and then we can get into these comparisons. All right, so here is the finished look with the Futurist palette, and I like the way this one came together too. I think I actually like the taupe side a little bit more though, but this is of course just a very easy neutral everyday color story. It really is very beautiful. Now let's get into these comparisons because these Hourglass palettes really are crazy expensive, and also the color stories are not that unique. So I did actually have a ton of options for each one. I just wanted to show you the differences in some of these other color stories, as well as discuss some of the differences in the formula. So first, let's start with the Modernist. So this is the more cool toned palette. And the first palette I want to compare this to is the Natasha Denona My Mini Dream. Now the My Mini Dream has been a favorite of mine for such a long time. I just love this color story. I love a good cool tone color story, especially one that leans a little bit more neutral. The Hourglass, I would say, is definitely more cool leaning, and I was not able to perfectly find that metallic taupe from the Hourglass in the Natasha Denona. However, popping them up side by side, you can see some similarities in the mattes, and you can also see that the shimmers in the Natasha Denona are a lot more sparkly, and I believe these are just metallics from Natasha Denona. So her metallics versus the Hourglass, they are not the same. This palette is also around $28. The Hourglass, like I said, is $68. In terms of the formula, now the Hourglass mattes are very silky, very smooth. I would say even the metallic felt very smooth. Natasha's mattes, I would say, are a little bit more thicker and creamier feeling. I think the Natasha Denona is a little bit more pigmented as well. And of course the shimmers do a lot more. The next palette I want to compare this one to is from Too Faced, and this is their Cold Smolder Nudes Mini. These little minis are some of my absolute favorites that Too Faced has ever done. I really like the tiny curated little palettes. I like the packaging, and the color stories are beautiful, and the formulas in here work very well also. Popping up the swatches between the two, you can see I got pretty close. The mattes, I almost got shade for shade identical. It's just that metallic from the Hourglass that I wasn't able to completely replicate, and the metallics in the Too Faced definitely pack quite a bit more punch. In terms of formula, the Hourglass formula I like. The matte formula I do think is a little bit silkier. It's a little bit better, and the metallic is really nice. But the formula in the Too Faced is not bad at all. This matte formula, I would say, is a little bit closer to the Hourglass than the Natasha Denona. It is a bit of a more thinner, silkier formula. It's just not quite as silky as the Hourglass, but they still perform beautifully on the lids. And of course, you do get two more shades, and they are a lot more sparkly. Next, I wanted to pull from Charlotte Tilbury, and this is the Beautifying Eye Trends Super Neutral palette, because this is also very cool toned. Now, looking at this, once again, I was able to get very, very close with the mattes. I wasn't able to copy that metallic from the Hourglass, but I do think that the matte formulas are quite similar. The matte formula in the Charlotte Tilbury is really, really nice. It's very buttery smooth. They're very pigmented. They blend very, very well. And the metallics in here do have my heart because they are so sparkly and shiny. So I do think this is a really nice option if you like that more cool toned taupe color story. But I do like this formula a lot as well. And then of course, this would not be a luxury palette video if I did not compare to some of my YSL quads. So the first one I have here is 100 Store Dolls, and you can see the Hourglass does appear to be a little bit more cool toned. Now I will say Store Dolls actually does have 2 satin shades. It has that sparkly topper and it has a matte. So we do have some different finishes in the YSL. Now I do think you could get a pretty similar look from Store Dolls as you could the Hourglass palette. I do think Store Dolls is always going to be a little bit lighter and brighter just because comparatively side by side it is a little bit brighter overall, not by much, but the YSL also gives you that sparkly topper. Now, not everybody loves those. I personally love them because they're incredibly sparkly. So that's the main difference between the two formulas as well. I am the biggest fan of the YSL formulas if you're new here and you don't already know that. And finally, for comparisons to the Modernist palette, I also pulled out one of the newer YSL quads. This is in Captivating Dunes. Now, these are pretty similar as well. This is another cool tone color story from YSL. Popping up the swatches, the mattes, very, very similar. When we get into the shimmer and the lightest shade, they're not. The shimmer in here isn't quite as taupe. It does end up switching a little bit more brown. And the lightest shade is, of course, this gorgeous sparkly topper that just brightens the look so beautifully. So I feel like in terms of comparison, I would say the Too Faced ended up giving me the most similar in terms of the shades, but formula wise, I would say maybe the Too Faced and the Charlotte Tilbury together would give me a sort of similar formula to the Hourglass. Now getting into the Futurist palette, and I feel like this one is probably the absolute least unique. This is a warm brown color story, so I have a ton of comparisons here. First, I have from YSL, this is 710 over Bra, and this is another of my favorite YSL quads. You can see they're both on that more warm toned brown color story. The YSL does have 2 more satin shades along the bottom. We have the sparkly topper and then we have the matte. Same comments toward the formula, whereas the Hourglass is just these creamy sort of silky mattes and very smooth shimmers. Over here we just have that more cream to powder formula that I love so much. Popping up the swatches, they are relatively similar. The YSL is going to give us a little bit more depth, but there is a little bit more brightness from the Hourglass. I also wanted to swatch this beside the Mini Bronze from Natasha Denona because this one just looked quite warm to me, and then once swatched beside the Natasha Denona, it looks a little bit more neutral. It's still pretty warm, but it does look a little bit more neutral. Once again, I was able to get some similar shades, but you can see that the Natasha Denona gives us a lot more shine from these metallics. I also pulled out Brown Cashmere from Dior. Now, this is one of my favorite formulas I've ever tried from Dior. It's just probably one of the most pigmented but creamy blendable formulas they've ever come out with. And I would say that this formula compares the closest to these new Hourglass palettes, because they are both designed to be a little bit more subtle, a little bit more refined and sophisticated. And in general, the mattes are just very smooth and silky. The shimmers are also beautiful. I would say the satins and the shimmers in the Dior are also on that more subtle side. I do think the Dior gives a little bit more sparkle than the Hourglass. And popping up those swatches, they're relatively similar color stories. While I wasn't able to get shade for shade dupes, I do think that on the eyes, you're really not going to be able to tell which palette you went in with. And that's the thing with these brown shadows. You're really not going to know a ton of difference on the eyes, whether you get shade for shade dupes or not. Then I pulled out the Golden palette from Natasha Denona. And again, some very, very similar looks. Of course, you're going to get a lot more from Natasha Denona. This palette is $69 for 15 shades. This one is $68 for 4. So you do get a lot more from Natasha's palette. And if you have Golden, you'll definitely be able to create some very, very similar looks to this Futurist palette. The new Praline palette from Viseart will also give you some very, very similar looks. And I'll pop up those swatches once again. And Viseart actually kind of outshines the Hourglass in terms of the metallics. Viseart is usually really, really stunning with their formulas and their shimmers, but they aren't always the most shiny. And I feel like if they're sort of outshining Hourglass, that tells you just how subtle these are. In terms of the matte formula, I would say the Viseart is a little bit more powdery in the matte department, but kind of similar matte formulas overall, but I would say Viseart is a little bit more pigmented. I also pulled the Natasha Denona I Need a Warm palette for some pretty obvious reasons, and I'll pop up the swatches. You can see I was nearly able to get perfect shade for shade dupes with the I Need a Warm. Of course, Natasha's formulas are so much more shiny and sparkly, and they're going to pack much more of a punch than the Hourglass. And I have already gone through my overall thoughts on Natasha's formulas, but if you have I Need a Warm, you can definitely create the exact same looks that you can do with the Futurist palette. And same thing with the Natasha Denona Biba palette. If you have Biba, you have Futurist. So this is her classic all neutral palette. Side by side, of course, you can see those similarities. I mean, with Biba, you can do a more cool tone look, you can do a warm tone look, or you can stick with those true neutrals. And popping up those swatches, you can see I was able to almost perfectly replicate those shades once again. But once again, Natasha's shimmers are packing a lot more of a punch. I also wanted to mention that the Biba has been out for a long time, so the shimmers that you're getting in here are her older shimmer formulas, and they're still packing quite a bit more of a punch than the Hourglass. And finally, I did of course compare it to my beloved Sigma Spectrum palette. This is a newer palette that I've been absolutely loving that has also taken up residence on my desk just because it's the perfect neutral palette. It has literally every single neutral brown I could ever want, plus some shimmers. So I was able to get some very, very similar comparisons from this palette as well. So if you have this one, you can definitely create some similar looks to Futurist. The Sigma shimmer formula is also just absolutely stunning and so sparkly, but their matte formula is so good. I would say the matte formula in Sigma is very, very close to the Hourglass, but I would say also a little bit creamier. All right, so now that we've created two different looks, we've done our comparisons, I think we can agree the Futurist palette is probably the absolute least unique. We all have these shades so many times over in our collection, even if it's not 100% shade for shade dupes. Modernist is also not unique, but I do have less comparisons to this one than the other one. Now, I do think these are a little bit more of a refined, kind of an elegant sort of formula. These aren't going to pack as much shimmer, as much shine as something like Natasha Denona or even YSL, but these aren't going to enhance texture on the lids. They're just going to be very, very wearable, very everyday formulas. Now, the one thing I will say is that they're not unique at all. And if you like a lot of sparkle, you'll want to pass on these because they're really not going to pack a lot of that. So I like these, but I think if you're wanting to purchase these just because you love Hourglass or you love the super subtle refined shadows, you might really like these. And I don't think you'll be disappointed in the formula, but I would recommend waiting for a sale just because I really don't think there's anything about these in terms of formula, in terms of packaging, that justify $68 each. For example, the YSL quads that are also $68, you get this much more elevated packaging. I think the formula is something special, especially compared to the Hourglass. The Hourglass is a very basic formula. It's a good formula, but it is basic. Whereas this is actually something special with these incredibly creamy shadows and the sparkly toppers. I just think you get more from YSL for that same $68 price point. Are these still crazy expensive? Absolutely. But I think if one of these justifies the price point more, it's the YSL over the Hourglass. So while these are really nice palettes, I like the color stories, I like how easy and simple they are to use, I like how flawless they look on the eyes. I can get that exact same thing from a lot of other palettes and formulas that cost a lot less. I just don't think that as much as I like these and as pretty as I think they are, that there is anything here that actually justifies the $68 price point. Not the formula, not the packaging, not the color stories, not anything about them justifies this price point. I think they're good. I think they're nice quality. If you want them, you won't be disappointed, but do wait for a sale. That is where I'll leave it. Let me know down below if you are planning to purchase any of these. Did you already? Which one did you grab and are you loving it? Just let me know all of your thoughts down below. Or are you skipping them altogether? Did I talk you out of them? Let me know that too. I just love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.